Om Satyena Labhyastapasa Hyesa Atma Samyagyanena Brahmacharyena Nityam Antaha Sarirehi Jyotirmayo Hi Shubhraha Yam Pashanti Yataiha Kshinadoshaha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The Atman, the indivisible soul and self, in all beings and in all things, is realized by moderation, by knowledge, by austerity, and by veracity. All of these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it everywhere, existing in everything, even here in this very mind and body. May Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, and may Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Here on New Year's Day, which it also has the distinction in our tradition of being the Kalpataru Day, that day when Sri Ramakrishna blessed all the householders with that beautiful saying, Chaitanya Ho, may your consciousness be awakened. We gather for what's going to be a month of Sundays, and 5 Sundays because January holds 5 this year. And so we are beginning into a subject that's very serious and is going to help qualify us for understanding Sanatana Dharma, sometimes it's called, or the eternal religion of Mother India. And the Sanskrit for that qualification is called Adhikara Vichara. And you probably have heard of Atma Vichara. I would say if I were to put things in order, Adhikara Vichara would come first. And then, as I was teaching some weeks ago here in this very room of the ashram here on the big island of Hawaii, that there are 3 phases to Atma Vichara. That inquiry, first to find out what you're not, then to find out who you are, and then to affirm and live in that realization. Naham, Kaham, Saham, I think they say that in Sanskrit. So possibly before any of that happens for the serious disciple or aspirant or seeker of truth, through the combination of religion and philosophy that Divine Mother bequeaths to us and which Mother India grants to us in so many beautiful darshanas or pathways. Before any of that takes place, then, at least in the old days, we heard, and we are to think still, that devotees had to qualify themselves before they even approached the Guru. Now it's just a question comes up, or maybe somebody sees someone else with a guru, or hears about a guru coming to town. Oh, I think I'll go, maybe I'll find my guru. Someone actually wrote that to me in a chat email the other day. It says, oh, I see that you're a guru in the Sanatana Dharma tradition. This was a Hindu person writing. I said, yes, as it were, if you will. And he said, yeah, I'm still waiting for my guru to appear in front of me. So I thought, when has God ever appeared to anyone in except in a very rare occasion, when these criterion have been satisfied, like listed under longing. We were looking at that God blog yesterday, at the Saturday events. And we found out that such things as holy company and the development of discrimination between the real and the unreal, and chanting the names of the Lord, mantra, a whole list of things that could be filed under 3 or 4 yogas or more, were listed there under that need to have them before one even approached a guru. Sort of in the tradition of Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, saying that the qualified student approaches the guru through humility and prostration, and then questioning, service and questioning. And so all of the great teachers have come forth and talked about this qualification that's necessary as one approaches the teachers who should be authentic. They should have the 4 qualifications. And they too have gone through a regimen of seeking and learning, studying and realizing in the traditional way in India. Another word, or several words to use for Sanatana Dharma, would be Sat Darshana. It's called Sat Darshana. Basically, when you take Vedanta, Yoga, and Sankhya and put them together, that combination of great darshanas is called Sat Darshana. And it's the way to truth, Sat, and it combines 3 of these great pathways: Sankhya Yoga, Patanjali Yoga, and Vedanta, the Upanishads. So all of those great teachings got together, and those great teachers would be Lord Kapila, Lord Patanjali, and Lord Vedavyas through this sweep of time. The long efflux of time that Krishna mentions, where Dharma falls and has to rise again with the coming of a great soul. This isn't anything to worry about or to fear, because they also know that this wave that falls will also rise again many times, because it's based on the eternal ocean of consciousness that's been espied and affirmed by realized souls of a path that's pathless, that is non-duality, or the Advaita Vedanta of India. We'll look at that today and some of the concomitants that fall under its heading, as if there were this great umbrella called non-duality, and then under fall all of these other pathways that are qualified and that are dual, and that are based in wisdom, that are based in devotion, and are all underlying all of that would be practice, yoga, basically. So this is why you take deification that happens in Tantra and you subject it to the practice that happens in yoga. And then you arrive at the realization that occurs in Vedanta. And if you were so committed and devoted to go the distance from Gatam to Paragatam, as Lord Buddha said, then you would arrive at that non-dual realization. So some preamble words that come to my mind before I begin to enter into a month of 5 Sundays with this subject, adhikara vichara. It really needs to happen now. And in the old days, I was about to say it was there when you approached a teacher, because your parents taught it to you. We don't have that luxury or that boon in this day and age in the West, particularly. And I hear from modern day savants and seers in India that they don't have that luxury that much anymore in India even. And that it's all not that common either in Tibet and China, where the parents know the Dharma, whatever name you would call it, ethics or morality in the Western countries. And they're all clarified by teachings, by Atmagyan, teachings on the eternal nature of the self, or the identity of the apparently individualized self with the Supreme Self, so that the soul comes to know it's not an individual only, it's indivisible always. So starting off with some qualification then is extra wise in this day and age. We're going to need to look into this over the next month of Sundays. I've taught from the main chart that we've used before. I've used it on several retreats, and we'll use it in this way, maybe in a little different way than we have in the past, but nevertheless help us recall the depth and profundity that belongs to these pathways, these ancient eternal pathways. We call them both ancient and eternal, Sanatana Dharma. In India, well known for its religion and its philosophy, but better known for the fact that they never sundered religion apart from philosophy. They always saw these pathways as being unified, sahaja, in a natural way. Sahaja Tantra Siddhanta, they concluded that all of these paths flow out of the divine, and they flow into the external manifestation of the divine in beings and in things, as I just chanted. Satchena Labhyastapasa, that truth of the Atman is everywhere. It's in living beings and it's in things too, but it's, of course, veiled more and more in things and not realizable in things. But in a human being, it's realizable, and it's in its most sentient form. If we're to listen to Swami Vivekananda when he says that the human being is not sinful at all by nature, it's pure and perfect and divine by nature. So hearing those words, then you go looking for something definite inside of you, like you would search for oil and sesame seeds, taking all the care to make a press and to take the time to grow and harvest seeds. And you'd have to have some idea that there was some nutritious oil inside of it to begin with. So in that way, when people hear the truth spoken most recently by Swami Vivekananda here in the West for us, then that's the clue, or there's a clue, yes, but I meant to say that's the cue for the soul to realize the indivisible beyond the individual. And then they will go looking for teachers, as we've seen recently, and maybe take one up and give it up, and then take up a path and take that for a few weeks or a month, sort of in the style that America, particularly in the West, has become known for wanting quick fix, at the same time being straw and fire, as Vivekananda called us, not finding, due to our qualification, one great teacher that could guide us, and recognizing a great teacher like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa here on Kalpataru Day. That's especially pertinent because he could awaken people with a touch, with a thought, with a word, even people who were not of a monastic leaning or who were not fully renounced, but who still had work to do in the world and karmas to satisfy, desires to satisfy, karmas to neutralize. These people could also come to a great soul like that, and by a touch, a word, or a thought, get diksha. Vak diksha would be by the word, hasta diksha would be by the hand, manas diksha would be by a thought, by the mind, sankalpa diksha by the creative mind. There are different kinds of diksha that you can get from a soul, and people in the West have heard that and seen that it can happen, but they always take it on the sensational side, like if it were somehow an occult power rather than an opportunity to open the nadis in the closed down collective mind of humanity and let this great light, Chaitanya Ho, pass from one channel to another and then move inward and satisfy the business of Kundalini Yoga, who will come up these centers in the central channel, Sushumna, and light up the lotuses as she does, and return the human soul, as the father of yoga said, return it to its eternal emancipation. She returns the soul to Kaivalya, but first she has to strip away name and form, nature, so she can reveal what's beyond nature. If the soul's still clinging to nature, that's not going to work. So in the same way, it's not going to work to try and seek enlightenment without qualifying yourself. You could just take a simple example in everyday life. If you were a professional math teacher, or if you were a professional artist or dancer, and you look back on all the practice you did, all the study you did, take that all away. Could you have been that teacher? Could you have been that artist if you hadn't undergone that regimen of practice? It's no different and even more necessary to have that kind of qualification in spiritual life, so that, as Holy Mother said, is enlightenment, Brahman, realization of the Atman, just anything you can get, like going to the marketplace to buy some fish and some greens? People think that they can have it just like that. But the Upanishads are saying, Utistata, Jagrata, Prapya, Varani, Bodhata. You need qualification, you need competence. That because you're about to set out and walk the razor's edge of spiritual life to the ultimate goal. All the things you did down here in secular life and in earthly life and in worldly life and even in misguided life were inadequate to the task of qualifying you to recognize, number one, the path, number two, the Lord in human form, which means an avatar or your guru. So here in Kalpataru Day, we recognize Sri Ramakrishna as that avatara vadishtaya, consisting of the best of the makeup of all the avatars that have come before him. I'll read a little bit about that as we get going. So this introduces the subject adequately, I hope, about adhikara vichara. You analyze vichara, after you hear the words of these great souls. So you would read the Gita and then you would never read it again. I've heard that before. I read the Gita once in my life back when I was young, but did you ever study it with a teacher would be the next question to ask if you were the guru and asking a student, or the next question to ask yourself if you were seeking serious qualification. Did you read it? Then when you read it, did you have the tools necessary on hand to do your contemplation on each of the slokas and ferret out the sesame oil from each of those seeds, those seed words that are in all the slokas of the Bhagavad Gita? Because nahi gyanena sadrishyam pavitramiha vidyate, Krishna says, it's the best of all purifiers is knowledge. So if you're going to go about purifying the mind so that it can recognize the ever pure Atman that's always manifesting through the great souls, then you yourself are going to have to become a jeweler, as Sri Ramakrishna said, and learn to assess the value of the diamond. So that will happen both in terms of the best path to take and the best teacher to help guide you along that path. At the same time, keeping in mind that it could be a razor's edge path you're walking. So before I start into a second preamble, which I want to do all the time because I feel like qualification needs to be qualified. Basically, you can't hear this enough in today's day and age. As, even if you're 10 or 20, 30 or 20 or 30 years along your path, maybe you never did that Atma Vichara. Maybe you never did that Adhikara Vichara. You never attained a qualification deep enough to help you understand the deepest meaning of the scriptures, and you're 20 years into your path and you're still following it, but you never did the qualification necessary to understand the depths of it and the profundity of it, and then learn how to utilize it to gain Kaivalya or Samadhi or a Sampragyata or Satori or Nirbija, the ultimate Samadhi that these souls have had, which make them qualified to share these teachings with us. Well, if I were to look at, and I did, as you can see by this next chart, if I were to look at the necessities for qualifying yourself for Sanatana Dharma in this day and age, then this would be, on my left, on your right, would be a chart that would show you some of those. I titled it Qualification is King in Authentic Spiritual Life and Practice. So again, authentic is a key word there. I said if you really want to get serious about the path and understand it deeply, hopefully on your first pass, because the Father of Yoga has told us that some of the there's 2 spiritual impediments called antarayas in yoga. And one of them is that you keep making 1 step forward, 2 step back kind of progress. And I think it's inferred that this is not, you're not aware that you're falling 2 steps back. You're just patting yourself on the back because you made 1 step forward. But pretty soon you look up and you see the finish line up there. It looks farther away than when you first started on the path. And so how did that happen? See, so it's necessary to make advancement and to cover that ground and to claim it for yourself. And any hiker would know that. They'd make a certain day's progress, and that would be under their belt, and they know that they're that much closer to their destination. So that's rather how you have to look at this path, spiritual path. And another way you have to look at it is that it's mental. It's not physical. You can do everything you want physically, and you can get no closer to the goal spiritually. The seers of spirituality have affirmed that for us, not by hundreds and thousands of breathing exercises, not by millions of asanas, and not by progeny or earning millions of dollars or any of those things can you gain enlightenment. Those are the things that you're going to have to overcome in order to attain enlightenment. And so that makes detachment from the world, renunciation of the world if you're of a monastic leaning or if you're of a serious solo seeker. And that makes those all the more necessary. So that authentic spiritual life that you want to make sure that it's ongoing and that you're checking it constantly. It helps to have a teacher in that way. It's not like, oh, I took my teacher and then I got pushed out of the nest. That doesn't really ever happen with a true guru and disciple. They have that eternal connection between them. That's the eternal companion you're talking about. And that's the Father of all beings, including the Father of the gods that you're talking about. And that's not a bridge that you're going to want to burn if you have even the littlest, tiniest bit of wisdom about the nature of enlightenment and attainment and qualification. So I wanted to comment on that first, but let's read this quote because it gets us into a reading of Swami Vivekananda about adhikara vichara. So the quote here is, "The competency of the spiritually initiated aspirant is crucial for the determination of its true significance." So true significance of what your competence, your level of competence is. When you enter the path, when you become a beginning aspirant, when you move along it, and when you become more adept, and when you become advanced, All of these things are something to be studied and measured, not from any place of pride or egotism, as Holy Mother would warn us, but from the standpoint of just keeping track of the forward progress that you're making, so that you're not stagnating, or you're not caught in rajas, like Krishna says, circling in one place all the time, having an enjoyable life, thinking everything's fine, and then all of a sudden a fall into tamas or slothfulness or destruction and decay and death comes. So this is this true significance of measuring this competency. So that's a good word, competency in English for adhikara vichara. Going on, it says, this is termed adhikara vichara, qualification of the aspirant according to their capacity, leading to merit. And of course, you'll find the teachings of merit, punya and papa, in Buddhism accented a lot, merit and demerit. In fact, an easy path in Buddhism, if you can't understand the philosophy very deeply, and if you're not that influenced or called to practice a lot, would be just to quit doing demerits, acts that cause demerit, and always do acts that bring merit about. It's a simple way, and sometimes in which Buddha teachers will teach you. So if you can't make a lot of determination about your competency, as we just said, then you can be very sure that you're not adding more negativity, more weights, more negative karma to your path in this lifetime by leaving off, that is, negative actions. Anything that causes suffering to others, for instance, would be one way of saying it. If you looked at yoga right away, your competency would be what? The yamas and niyamas. That would be your measure in yoga. We could look at that when we get there briefly. Why? Because right away you've got non-violence, then you've got truthfulness, and then you've got the non-coveting of other people's goods or property. Can you apply that to this world today? That people are being honest and truthful with each other, governments, cultures, families? Are they nonviolent with one another in thought, word, and deed? And are they not interested in each other's possessions? Or are they actually jealous when they see that you have something they don't have and they secretly want it for themselves? All of these things are a kind of natural qualification in yoga that Father of Yoga put forward first. Do you have sacham? Do you have asteya? And do you have ahimsa? And then maybe after that, look towards what I just chanted. Satjena labhistapasa hyesa atma samyak jnanena, knowledge, brahmacharyena, moderation in appetites, nityam, always, eternally you should have these things. So I'm quoting from Vedanta, and then before that I quoted from Yoga, father of Vedanta, father of Yoga, Vedavyas, Patanjali, and you can see how their path, their way that they want you to follow, explains these very well. So that's something about merit and demerit. One simple thing a practitioner can do is just refrain from negative actions, violent thoughts or covetous thoughts, because basically I'm saying this is a mental path. It's physical has a part in it, but it's not the part that gives you attainment. You can't give up food and fast and get spiritual enlightenment. Even Buddha found that out, and other great souls found that out. You need vital energy in your body to get enlightenment. You need strength, and that's going to take food. And so you're going to have to look at Krishna's teaching of balanced sattvic food in the Gita and make sure you take only that and don't take the other. So isn't that what I'm saying here? It's demerit to take food. It isn't pure. What part of that didn't you connect? That you could all of a sudden say, oh, I'm not going to do negative actions anymore, and then all of a sudden partake in tamasic food. You belied the truth, and you betrayed your path, your vows that you took yesterday when you do that. So that's how exacting, yes, sometimes exasperating too, I was thinking, but how exacting and how straight and narrow this razor's edge path is compared to all other paths you might take in the world to gain something. So we could dwell on merit and demerit. There's a chart on that, but that's enough to say for now. Just leave off doing demerit in all ways that you possibly can. And one rule of thumb on the opposite side of what I just said, violence and covetousness and all that, is make sure that everything you do and think and say is not a source of suffering to anyone. That's how Holy Mother put it to us in this recent time. If you can do that, then you are practicing the path of merit. And finally, the quote says, the sages and seers deem it essential for Vedika and Tantrika discipline and studies. What do they deem essential? This qualification that you need, which we're about to look into. Now, it didn't take me long when I came upon this quote in the Sadhana Shastras, and when I came upon some of its echoes in some of the other darshanas, because I was well into my spiritual path, many decades in, to come up with this list. I said, well, how many darshans have I been teaching, and how many did I get transmitted to me, and how connected they are? Can I think of a number of them and then put the main bullet points there? So I did. I sat down, I just started plugging away at all the things I thought were most important if you were following one of these darshanas, because it's probably best, as both Kapila and Patanjali said, get one path and follow it to the end with a good guru. Then you can think of branching out, or then maybe you're not thinking of branching out at all. It'll just happen to you spontaneously, as it did to Sri Ramakrishna, and as it did to our founder here, Lex Hixon, SRV Associations, when he took to 4 or 5 different darshanas after he had grounded himself in the Advaita Vedanta of Gaudapada and the Vedika Tantrika school, I'd say, of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So this won't take long and should be not only gentle, it should also be elucidating. That first thing in Vedanta, if we go down the left-hand column, is you want sadhana chatushchaya. You want to do a practice. So a mental practice in Vedanta is much different than a physical practice in physical yoga or in some other paths you might take, like ritualism and so forth. They all, as I say, have their place. But if you want attainment, qualification leading to attainment, and its special significance to happen to you, as this important quote on top tells us, then these are the things that these souls that we know have gained attainment have taken to. One of those is the 4 treasures and 6 jewels. Actually, the 6 jewels are one of the 4 treasures. So I like to put it that way. Sometimes I say the 4 jewels, fine. But basically, Sat Sampati means basically you've got jewels there. Sama, Dhamma, Upariti, Titiksha, Samadhana, and Shraddha, aren't they? 6 of them. So those form the 3rd treasure of sadhana practice. So if you were a Vedantist, and not likely that it happened so abruptly to us as Americans when we came upon the Ramakrishna Order Swamis, or when you came upon any Swami from any mission that came over from India in these days, like Chenmaya mission or Shankara order had centers, or the Divine Life Society and others, centers that have been long lived here in the West. Not likely that that many of them were looking into the Vedanta darshana of old and telling you what was in it. You probably got the mantra, and depending on your temperament, maybe you started chanting and dancing, or maybe you heard, if you're studious, go read the Gita, or pick up the gospel from Krishna. It's got everything in it from soup to nuts. I heard one great, so-called great teacher say that. So, since that's not the case, then, if you were looking into deeper qualification in Vedanta and you're really interested in that path, and I'll show you in a minute how its competition, if you want to put it that way, all became outlived and merged into the one. Those 5 or 6 darshanas, you see, they all went like this, if you want a mudra for it. These 5 are all behind Vedanta. Vedanta is the long-lived darshana of India. And it comes from the word Vedas and Anta, and that means the end of the Vedas are the Upanishads. And that's non-duality, basically, as best as it can be said in words. That's non-duality, the Upanishads. And as accessible as those words can be, also, because you could have other non-dual scriptures like Ashtavakra Samhita and Avadhuta Gita and Adhyatma Ramayana and so forth. But some of those are very abstruse, not that easy to understand, especially without a teacher. So with the Upanishads and the Gita, and we'll leave the Brahma Sutras aside for now, but the Prasthanatraya, it's called, these 3 great landmarks of scriptural history. The Upanishads and the Gita are very accessible to people. Some of the Upanishads are very short. There's one about Om. If you want to know about the word right away, the deepest part of the word, you go to the Mandukya Upanishad and read 12 shlokas, and then you read the commentary of Gaudapada later. And that's how you qualify yourself to know what the word really signifies. People are walking around with Om in their t-shirts. In the 60s, I saw blacklight Oms on people's walls. I heard people say, hey man, do you know what Om means? And none of them did. Nobody had any teachings on Om. It was all an attraction to esotericism, or it was an attraction to occult powers, or it was just sensational for the sake of the ego, that they wanted to have something out of a different language to impress you with. And it didn't take us long to see that, and it didn't take us long after we saw it to find a teacher for the word, and then find out its real significance. So basically, that's what you're going to want to look for, is something of great merit, as we just talked about. So you're going to want those 4 treasures and the 6 jewels that are in them: discrimination, detachment, the 6 I just said, and the desire to be free. If you can implement all the first 3, which actually is 8, 6 plus 2, and then put the last one in place, you'll probably have a sincere desire for liberation at that time. But if you just go to somebody and say, I want to be free, I want to be free, and can you tell me how to be free? How are they going to explain how to get free? Because you haven't followed the tradition and qualified yourself in it. So, and maybe 2 days later, you're going to say, well, I decided I don't want to be free. I just found a job, just found a mate. I just found an object I like, or like a couple of people I know, I just almost drowned out there in those waves today. And I realized I don't want to die. But 2 days ago, they were depressed and telling me they wanted to commit suicide. Well, why didn't you just let yourself go on the waves? Not a bad way to die. But no, when it comes down to facing death off, nobody wants to die. And it's not like we want to equate death, realization with death, but it is the death of all things that impede you from non-dual realization. They're going to have to not die as far as death and decay and go away forever. They're going to have to dissolve back into the source from which they came. And those are prime teachings in both yoga and Vedanta, and in Tantra too, is that you dissolve things back into their source. That's death. That's what most people call death. Because they're so attached to the form that if you dissolve anything they like, an object, their bodies, their children, whatever, they think that's it, game over. And they don't have the wherewithal yet, due to lack of qualification, to know that everything is just returning to its source. And then it's coming out again. That's why they use the ocean as an analogy for that. Can hardly find a better example of that than the ocean's waves falling and rising. Oh, there, oh, but it's gone. Oh, here it came back. And it just goes on and on like that, you see. And that's the same way with beings, living beings. Human being, today it is, tomorrow it is not. Who said that? That's our Holy Mother, Sri Sharada Devi, the great Mother of the universe, a manifestation of Mother Kali in this age. Human being, today it is, tomorrow it is not. And then she followed that up by saying, nothing follows you into death except karma. So you want to make sure that when you dissolve this body and everything, that you don't have karma with objects still, that you'll drag that along with you when you should be free. A mongoose can't climb up a wall to its hole if there's a brick tied to its tail, as Ramakrishna said. So yes, you'd think that, oh, I can pass and just get free and it's going to be so beautiful. And even heaven will be beautiful. But the ancestors are not having a beautiful time there when they're pulled back to earth and have to face the 6 transformations again. And you're one of them and they're one of you. And you're all caught here in this samsara again, against your will, because heaven was fine with you for now, but now you find yourself back on this mixture of heaven and hell. Say peace to all, to me, no violence be, no harm be, from the highest to the lowest. As Vivekananda said, paraphrasing him, all earths, all heavens, all hells, all hopes and fears, I do renounce. I give them up. Thus cut thy bonds. So sadhana chatushtai would be the go-to move for qualification in Vedanta. I wouldn't say it exhausts everything though, because there you have this knowledge of how to explain the appearance of the Purashtaka body. That's called Panchakosha. See, so basically you've got this 8-fold body, or 5-fold sheaths, or 24 cosmic principles, or 32 cosmic principles. It's been a teaching that's been very long-lived in India, and it's moved through many darshanas, both Vedic and Tantric. And so the Panchakosha is probably the easiest and quickest move to make to explain how your body is here. And it takes your body and puts it into 5, basically. And from that 5, you should be able to condense it down to 3, my gross body, my subtle body, and my causal body. And when you do that, you know the difference between body, internal mind, and deep sleep. That is formlessness. And so, I mean, if you've practiced these and heard these from teachers and then gone to study them in scriptures, spent 10, 20, 30 years with them, these are realizations you have. They're not just knowledge anymore. Oh, that person's very knowledgeable. Someone said that to Swami Vivekananda once in Chicago. Oh, we admire you so much because you have so much knowledge. And he told him, that's because you're a fool, and so am I. You think that knowledge, well, the knowledge that you have will do it. But this qualified wisdom, that is, this wisdom that you've qualified yourself for, settles in as realization to you. You could no easier get rid of it than you could live without the nutrients from food in your body. It's just a part of you. So Panchakosha means really your physical body, your vital body, prana, life force, your mental body, your mind, your intellectual body, your intelligence or your intellect, and your ego body, that individual self body. Those 5 are called Panchakosha. There's nothing anywhere in the world, in all the religions, that lays it out like that for you. So that you can say what? I'm none of them. I'm not that. or I'm all this. That's how you get to all this, by saying not that, not that. It's called neti neti to iti iti. And that's a part of Vedanta too, a very high part of it. Keeping moving here, we've got the 4 yogas in Vedanta that are brought out. Yes, we're going to take them for Vedanta, you see, because Patanjali has one yoga. That's the 8 limb. That's Raja Yoga. So that's one of those 4. But basically, and Sri Krishna mentions the 4 yogas in the Bhagavad Gita, calls them Chatur Jasya, the 4 paths, the 4 paths of great paths. But in Vedanta in this day and age, now we have Vivekananda has put out those books of the 4 yogas, Jnanam, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Raja Yoga, his commentary on Patanjali's system. So that's nicely placed under the Vedanta umbrella to qualify yourself with. So everyone who's a Vedantist since the 60s, when I came into it, I see that people are, they're not just satisfied with saying, I'm a Vedantist and I've read some of the Upanishads. Now they run off to find Vivekananda's 4 yogas so they can qualify themselves further and deeper in the Vedanta. It's like Vedanta all of a sudden sprouted 4 paths when, it wasn't a path before at all. It was just a truth. So now all of a sudden you say, oh, there's 4 channels running in that truth. And I think I'll go course along them, you see. And Trigunatita is probably worthy of mention. In their limited space, I always put those as the 4 bullet points. Trigunatita means we've got beyond the 3 gunas. So Vedanta, how about yoga? I already mentioned the yamas and niyamas, 5 of each. That's something to avail yourself of. Those are the first 2 limbs of 8 limbs. So my complaint has been, by looking at yogic aspirants, let's put the hatha aside for now, because that's something to complain about quite often. But basically, if they get beyond that and they know that yoga is something much deeper, like say applying to the 5 sheaths you just learned about in Vedanta, that there's a yoga for my breath, there's a yoga for my mind, and there's a yoga for my intellect, and there's a yoga for my ego. And say, if you think basically in that way, then you're going to want to subject yourself to those practices, and the yamas and niyamas are those first 2 limbs that will help you do that. Things like study of scripture and doing austerities, tapas, they're included in there. So Patanjali thought it out really well. He really filled it in few things that were all mature and full. It's like someone hands you, a bottle of nutritious liquid, and you find out, oh, it's only got like an inch in the bottom, and that would be like some practices and some teachings, but they hand you a full bottle. That's like getting the yamas and niyamas, everything about spiritual life that you could possibly need, that's most important to your start, is in the yamas and niyamas. But people are already climbing the trees, Ramakrishna said. So they're looking for the fruit up on the 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th limbs, but they haven't even set their foot on the first branch yet, he said. So you don't want to get up there and find out that you don't have ahimsa, that you don't understand truthfulness, that you're still coveting things when you're telling yourself you're not. And so by the time you get up high and you find out the yamas and niyamas weren't learned by you, that you didn't qualify yourself for yoga, the limbs get slippery. See, it starts raining. You're bound for a fall off of that tree. And many people complain about it. Then the word concept comes to mind. It probably would be a concept in the West still, but to look at objects as alambanas. This is how Patanjali beautifully explained it to us. Alambanas means a center for your concentration, a center for meditation. So you're going to take whatever it is I'm looking at right now, my own book there on the shelf, you see, or that chart, or that bookcase, or the picture of my guru on top of the bookcase. Whatever it is I'm looking at is now, I now make it a traditional and authentic station for my meditation. I have selected that it be so. So then I want to take, as Patanjali said about this teaching, 7 different levels of mastery for the mind. There are 7 different ways, he said, that you can master the mind, and one of those is meditating on something that's pleasant and inspiring. It can be a form. He doesn't get into whether God has form or no form. Yoga doesn't worry about that. We'll get to the philosophy later. So it could be the form of in the picture frame of your guru. That's pleasant and inspiring to me. I'll meditate on that for a while. And that's what a lot of people are doing. They were doing that back when I was in my late teens and 20s. I was asked to do that early on. I didn't like the picture in the frame, so I didn't do it anymore after that. I found Sri Ramakrishna, put him in a frame. That's better. You see, now I've got the real thing. So alambanic quintuplications, basically, that's the old wisdom. You'd have to jump down to Samkhya to understand that now. You see, that there are 5s. And the Upanishad said that early on too, probably not as early as the Samkhya, but the Vedanta realized eventually that back in the Samkhya times, they had realized that everything comes out in 5s, 5 elements, 5 senses, 5 subtle senses, 5-fold mind, 5 tanmatras, 5 pranas. You could just look at all sorts of 5s until it became so certain that was the way consciousness got into a form, that God gave you a human body with 5 fingers so you wouldn't forget it. Or you looked at your guru's feet and you saw 5 toes, and it reminds you, oh yeah, everything's come in 5s. But we have forgotten that quintuplication process. So in my way of thinking in this day and age, in the last 30 or 40 years that I've been sharing this, I want people to look at the 5s again. That's the old Adi, original, Daiva, divine, Vidya, wisdom. That if you know that, you're qualified for so much more than if you did not know it. I'm moving rather swiftly through these right now, as you can see. Pranayama is important to the extent that you connect it to the word, the in-breath, the held breath, the out-breath. You don't get the Advaitic Vedanta teaching on pranayama in the Hatha Yoga schools. You get it in the Jnana Yoga, and you get it in the Advaita, that they either go with the 3 worlds, AUM, or they go with the 3 kinds of breath, in, held, and out, or they go with the 3 levels of your consciousness, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. I just said what took me 30 seconds to say that. I wish you'd just take that out and write it down. And then you could say, I know the meaning of pranayama. Because so many people just breathe and turn their lungs into a bellows. So very important to know the meaning of pranayama. And it will also help qualify you for understanding the letters of your mantra when you get them from a guru. Whether the word is I'm, because that has 3 letters, or whether the word is Shrim, because that has 3 letters, really 4 that are 3. And Om has 3 letters. Letters here means matras. So each one of those is infused with power, Shakti power. And so that way, you're going to want to know how to access that power and access the being inside of that's going to open the doorway for that power to come to you, like Chaitanya Ho style. Why do you think Sri Ramakrishna on Kalpataru Day, this very day, many years ago, could have that power when he said, oh, your consciousness awaken, or he could touch Narayan on the head, or Krishna could touch Arjuna, and this power just awakened spontaneously on the spot there, is because they knew the power that was in these letters, and they had meditated on them. So back up there, back up to Alambanas, right? if you take the pranayam, and I didn't mean to skip Kriya Yoga there as I was going through the list, but as long as we're here, take the pranayam and meditate on these three connections I just mentioned as alambanas, as things to meditate on, not just something to do. Okay, I did my breathing exercise, but didn't think at all what it meant. Everything has a meaning, and that meaning gets lost. Haven't you noticed how everything's losing its meaning out there? If it's true with superficial and surface things, it's even going to be more true with, how do I get oil out of a sesame seed? That's going to get lost. How do I get gold out of rivers? Everything is going to go back into hiding, as it has for people. And this higher knowledge will be the first thing to disappear. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Back to Kriya Yoga. In yoga, that's the combination of three things. It's very telling because some versions of Kriya Yoga that have come along in more modern times are very sensational and can be quite misleading. They have to do with physical nerves, and again, pranayam for the wrong reason, and all sorts of other risks. But in Patanjali's authentic 8-limb yoga, Kriya Yoga, consisted of three things: do austerities. Where's that gone? And study the scriptures. Svadhyaya, it's called. Make sure you study them every day with a guru is best. And keep your devotions to the Lord. Ishvara Pranidhana, it's called. When this great yamas and yamas, which I just called the qualifications for yoga, got put there in that order by Patanjali, and he looked at them himself and said, oh my goodness, those three would do it. I didn't actually waste my time thinking up the other 7, but these 3 would actually suffice, basically. If I was just to study the scriptures, do some austerity around what I studied, and then pray to the Lord to help me realize these things, to cast his grace, her grace upon me, then you'd have what's called Kriya Yoga. You'd be practicing the Kriya Yoga path, and it would consist of 3 things. And those 3 things would be enough to vault you, transport you along the path. Chitta vrittis would be next, and pratyahara after that. Chitta vrittis would mean the original best idea of calming your thoughts. That's where it all started. There were versions of that back in earlier days, but in earlier days, pre-Patanjali, people didn't have trouble with their minds. If you read the scriptures, in India, everyone's dharmic. It's not, they're still facing off against death and decay and problems, things that get in the way of their path, but basically they don't have any doubt about the Dharma, about their place with the Lord. So that's because their minds were more under their control. It's like everyone prefers to have a restless mind now, and they don't know that that's detrimental for them. That's where demerits will come from keeping your mind in a restless state. It's just like a magnet attracts iron filings. So those negativities will come running to the mind that's not balanced. So chitta vrittis, vibrations of thought, was a great move on Patanjali's at about maybe 180 AD or so, because we know that he loved Buddha's system. So some of the things in Patanjali Yoga sound a lot smack of Buddhism. So we know that he probably in that particular incarnation came forward and authored or composed this 8-limbed yoga. Before that, we knew that there were the 4 yogas, and Krishna had mentioned them and all that, but he was fashioning this into a tree for this time, a great tree that could be climbed and has 8 main limbs. The Upanishads had done it with 6 limbs. It's called Sadanga Yoga. I've taken you through those teachings before in the past. So Chaturdasya Yoga back in Krishna's time, all of a sudden Sadanga Yoga in the time of the Upanishads, and then Patanjali comes along and gives you 8-limbed yoga. And with that, then you can calm the chitta vrittis of your mind. It's actually said this yoga is for doing that. So this yoga is for restless minds. It's for people who don't like to have restless minds anymore. You need peace of mind first and foremost. You're sitting there in a body, your energy is flowing or not. You're sleeping or not very well. You're eating or you're not eating nutritiously enough. You've got all these things going on with you. And your mind is dictating the pace of this. And that very mind could pull you back from these things. And you wouldn't have demerit anymore. It wouldn't be something the teachers would have to come and teach you, like the Buddhists. They wouldn't have to come along and say, punya papa, punya papa. They just come along and say, there's no papa here, so I'll just talk to you about punya. Where'd papa go? He's gone, he took off. He's not there anymore. There's no problem. So chitta vrittis, the calming of the waves of the mind, is attractive to people if we can get them to listen to the Raja Yoga, like Vivekananda putting out his commentary called Raja Yoga on this system. That would be something that would attract people. Just like if you say Kundalini, and some people kind of, turn their head to you, and then you say chakras, and they get closer, you see. Because it's beginning to sound new and different and kind of enticing. What are those? Oh, you mean I have a nervous system that's internal, not just the nervous system of my body that's conducting energy and blood and other things in my body, you see, via the prana, but I have an internal nervous system that's got hundreds and thousands of nadis in it, like all connected, like the spokes of a chariot wheel to the hub, the Svetasvataropanisad says. So that would attract them all of a sudden. You see, well, there's something there that I got to look into. Hopefully they'll hold that interest. And then pratyahara. I chose that of all the 8 limbs because that's the stumbling block for today. People probably just kind of bypass yamas and yamas, or they say, well, I'm nonviolent enough and I tell the truth. I don't really need to go any further with those. So I'll just jump to asana now. Probably spend a lot of time in asana and pranayama because it kind of feels good to me. And I think I'm making progress. So I'll just do that for a long time. Like one person I talked to a couple of days ago, how long have you been doing that? Breathing exercises? 30 years. Could have done it 3 months and got its benefit. Time to go on. Climb the tree, you see, I was telling him. So basically that's hanging out far too long. And then it makes this pratyahara such a difficult proposition for people, because that's where you do get rid of chitta vrittis that are bothering you. It's in pratyahara. You haven't got concentration yet, that's the next limb. So you're looking longingly, oh, look at these people who have concentration. They've got everything in life. And spiritual people who have concentration, they're even having experiences beyond life, beyond death. So what's wrong with me? I'm stuck here at this 5th limb of pratyahara because I can't get my mind to leave off of contact with the objects. If you want to put it in one sentence, the objects are following me in my waking, into my dreaming state. And as seeds in my deep sleep state, I can't burn them. I don't know how to do that. So help me, Father of Yoga, get to that 6th limb. And he probably call from the 8th limb and say, okay, well, I have to come down and tell you this. And climb down a bunch of limbs at 180 AD and get to you and say, look back, see the fruits on the first 2 limbs, go pick them. You see, you forgot to do yamas and niyamas. That's why pratyahara is not working for you right now. And since pratyahara is not working for right now, that's why you can't be like me. Enlightenment. So it's like the Upanishads, one of the most famous stories is the 2 birds. One perched on the low branch, one perched on the high branch. The bird on the low branch keeps eating fruits, and they're sour and sweet. They're ripe and rotten. Sound like, pleasure and pain, and a problem. That sounds like a problem with the yamas to me. Asteya and so forth. And the upper bird, he keeps looking up there, and he's just sitting in the sunshine, happy as can be all the time, hardly ever eats, or only selects the ripest of fruits there in the sun. So finally, the lower bird just flies up there and gives everything, all those experiences of pleasure, pain, gives them away. It's a very famous story that you can read in the Upanishads. It occurs in several of them. I found it again in the minor Upanishads the other day. So that kind of a quick look at Patanjala, and I do have a method to this madness now, and I'm just going to look at Samkhya and run through those real quick, and then we're going to take up another chart which shows us some of the connections here that we'll be making over the next month, the whole month of January. In Samkhya, they basically have what's called Tattva Vid. Under Vedanta, you know how I subtitled it was Neti Neti. It's about doing away with things that aren't needed or necessary. Under Patanjala, I put Ashtanga Yoga because that's the famed, authentic 8-limbed yoga. And under Samkhya, I'm putting the subtitle as Tattva Vid, becoming aware of the wisdom principles. 24 of them start us out, and that's where those sets of 5s become pronounced. The quintuplication process: air, earth, fire, water, and ether, tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, and smelling, and so forth. Inward, the subtle elements that you use in Dream Tonight, and the prana that flows through and carries them in the tanmatras. These are all a study to be made to qualify yourself in Samkhya. Then there's Trividam Dukkam. That was, I think, the early version of Buddha's Four Noble Truths. Like, there is suffering. Trividam Dukkam is just much the same like that. And actually, Kapila was born in Kapilavastu, which is the birthplace of Kapila, and that's where Buddha was born many centuries later, probably millennia later. So the connection between Samkhya Yoga of Kapila and Buddhism of Buddha is almost undeniable. It might as well be the same soul. So coming back in a later age, in a later yuga, there's Lord Buddha coming up with the 37 limbs of enlightenment, which back in Samkhya times was the 24 cosmic principles with a few things added on to it, and Shaivism adding on to that with 36 spandas or tattvas onto the Samkhya system. So this original system of 24 cosmic principles and the Trividam Dukkam, I can't think of anything that's probably more missing and also more necessary and more needed to help you qualify yourself for understanding yoga and Vedanta. So these are called Sat Darshana, these three. Might as well be called Sat Darshana. These are the three darshanas that are the standard ones. I'll show you more about that in a minute. The 10 tenets of Samkhya Yoga, I can show you a chart on that later this month. The 9 complacencies and the 8 great accomplishments, those all fall into teachings of Samkhya Yoga. So we will come back to this chart, and we will look at it in terms of seeing how we would qualify ourselves in these other very fascinating darshanas. There's a cult following in the world today for Vishishta Yoga, and it doesn't get mentioned much. It's not really what you call an Astika Darshana. It's just so much shared by Vedanta and yoga in a sense. But as one of the earliest of all realized souls was Vishishta. He taught the teenage Ramchandra, the early avatar, all the teachings that he knew that existed in the Vedas at that time. And then Kundalini Yoga, I guess, also very, very attracting to people, at least it was back in the 60s, 70s. And now hopefully we can reclaim it and bring it back. And then Tantra with all of its river, and Buddhism itself too. You might be all almost called the new kid on the block as far as India is concerned. But since we're talking about Tantra and Vedanta, let's look here. Actually, I've got it up already. And we can see how these have been two great rivers flowing constantly throughout the time span of India, which of course is cyclic. One of Buddha's great teachings was everything comes and goes in cycles. And to get free means to get off those cycles, get the soul out of rounds of birth and death, for instance, or out of samsara, out of life's of birth, life, and death with the ancestor, and the ancestors out of heaven, earth, and hell cycles. You can point to so many cycles that that there are ways for ending. That's Kaivalya, like the cycle of the soul born into nature again and again, Prakriti. So they can finally see what the Divine Mother comes along, strips nature away and shows it its true face. That's one of the slokas in the sutras, rather, in Patanjali's yoga. He says that. So the beautiful thing, probably one of the foremost things about Tantra and Vedanta, because now we're taking a quicker look at these two, right? Tantra and Vedanta. The reason why they are called these two great rivers, and they help pair up religion and philosophy that never actually got torn apart in India like it did in other countries, or made into professions like it did in other countries. It wasn't something that you made your living by necessarily. You could be a Vedic priest, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you were equipped or qualified to get enlightenment. You were thinking about second birth. You're thinking about being twice born. You're thinking about having children. You're thinking about making money with religion inside the temples, and that's how you made your living, and you were supposed to have guided people that way. And well, we know how that went in India over the last 2,000 years, how it's been criticized by Vivekananda when he saw it in this day and age, when he came back into the body in India at that time. So this Vedic religion and philosophy very well paired up here as two great rivers, and the streams that flow next to each other are Vedic and Tantric. So the quote here says, "Philosophy in India never stands sundered from religion. It is never considered as divested of religious life and living. Further, every system has its own value in its own particular region. The various interpretations of the scriptures are therefore tenable from the standpoint of the various interpretations from the various temperaments and individuals forming different religious sects." So, first point to be made, we see these, I look and I see two rivers, but I don't see two waters. The rivers are mingling their waters. And so they might as well have the same source and the same destination. That's the first thing to know about Vedanta and Tantra. And second thing to know, which isn't necessarily, although it's inherent here when he mentions religious sects, is that that Veda and Vedanta tends to lean more towards, as you can see by the chart, more towards the wisdom path, and Tantra leans more towards the deification path with deities. In other words, deification. I'm deifying. Now you can see, if you looked at yoga, we've already looked at the alambanic quintuplications. So if you're selecting something to meditate on, you're considering that to be divine. And I want to see what it is in its nature. Like if you're meditating on an image of Sri Ramakrishna on the altar, you want to know what's in Sri Ramakrishna, and pretty soon, if you meditate on him long enough, you get what's in Sri Ramakrishna by meditating on him over years. depending on how one-pointed in concentration your mind's focus is. That's that 6-limb concentration that you wanted to get past by settling your mind and getting past Pratyahara's problem. So you could see here, and it may look a little bit complex, but I can divide it for you. The Vedic stream goes off to the left, and it passes. It's really based in non-duality, Advaita. So these earliest seers had these profound realizations that Brahman is one and indivisible, and I am that came second. All the great sayings like Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. So the that Tat means Brahman, and thou is this apparently individualized self called the Jiva or the Jivatman, or if you've realized it, the Atman, or if you see the two as one, it's the Paramatman. You see, so you can call Brahman or Parabrahma and Paramatman the same thing. Paramahamsa comes from that same line of reasoning. So Advaita Vedanta is there at the upper left there with the Om sign on it. Look across to the Tantric stream. It has the Bijam Hrim, and you can see how it leans more towards the sacred two, Dvaita or dualism. So there is where you would immediately qualify yourself by learning about Shiva and Shakti, the two who are one. We like to call them that. And then look in the middle of this circle, this dotted line circle that's connecting the two streams, and you see Vishishta Advaita, qualified non-dualism, and the heading there. These are the 3 stages of philosophy. So this is what connects all 3 of these steps, and it also connects. It's also the mutual ingredient or essence of Veda and Tantra. Mutual essence. They all proceed on these 3 great stages or these 3 great steps, because in so-called dualism or Tantra, when, like, say, Kundalini Yoga would be leaning more towards a tantric system, so you would be taking the Kundalini up the central channel, inward to these lotuses, in order so that you could meet Shiva at the crown of the head. So doesn't that sound like starting out dualism and along the way qualifying yourself to realize the oneness of the practitioner and the one who the practitioner is trying to realize and merge with, just like these rivers are constantly merging in and out of each other, 2 great streams. And in some ages, you could see these 2 great streams may be coming towards a confluence of the 2 just before they meet the ocean. So that's also a sign in times that these 2 great streams have the same destination for them. And they're always moving towards this oneness. Sometimes they sing about that in the scriptures. Om Indram Mitram Varunam Agni Matarata Jivaha Sapana Gurutman Ekam Satvi Prabhuda Vedantyagnim Yaman Matarishvanamaho. That sloka from the Rig Veda, which it took me a long time to look up to get the other surrounding or accompanying words to it, has that beautiful phrase, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedant. So it means Ekam Sat is one truth, and there are many paths leading to it. So if we had more time today, I will show you, but I could show you next week, how that works in religion and philosophy. That would be the next chart after we finish this one to look at, so that we could see what Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanta means. But it's the oldest statement in any written scripture that we know of that declares this innate oneness, ekam sat. There's one truth always and only. It's unchanging, and other paths will lead to it. Many paths can lead to it. Like if you looked at a forest from the air and you saw many paths going through the forest, they're all heading toward the foot of the mountain. So in that way, they consider all religions, not just the Indian religions, but all religions as being authentic paths to get to the highest truth. And Sri Ramakrishna, the most recent and excellent exemplar of that understanding called universality. The Advaita Vedanta, quite rare in realization these days, and not fully understood yet by the masses and by very many practitioners. But universality, that's even more rare than Advaita Vedanta. At least we have a philosophy and some great seers that have exemplified what Advaita Vedanta is or should be in realization. But until Sri Ramakrishna came along, that high principle of universality didn't have an exemplar. Few people had mentioned it. But you can see how India, speaking of qualification, qualified itself for universality. It qualified itself for knowing that all paths led to the goal because it worked it out in its own country first. It had Vedanta, it had yoga, it had Tantra, it had Buddhism, it had Samkhya, it had Kundalini yoga, it had Shaivism, it had Bhakti, it had Jnanam, it had Raja, it had Karma Yoga, it had the 6 darshanas, and it had the worshippers of Mother Shiva, Vishnu, Ganapati, and Surya, the sun. Those are all distinct paths in India. So look at a forest just in India, you see all these leading to the slope, to the base of that mountain, and about ready to take the ascent to the highest height. So that's why I just sang this. Om Indram Mitram Varunamagni Matarato Divyaha Sasuparna Garutman. These are all names for the Lord in India. I think I brought that. To that presence, who is one, the seers assign many titles, such as the Father of the Gods, the eternal friend of all beings, the all-pervasive ether, the waters of life, the fire of yoga, the winged carrier of consciousness, the devourer of death, and the one who shines forth the light. That's an English translation of Om Indram Mitram Varunamagni or Matarato Divyaha Sasuparna Garutman, followed by Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti Agni. Means there's one truth and all these paths lead to it. And all these paths have their gods and their deities, and they have their practices, and they have their rituals. So there's where I'm saying India, Mother India, is the best qualified of all countries in the world to speak about universality, which finally got born in the form of Sri Ramakrishna. So many people were thinking that way. They said, we've got to have a man that really exemplifies that now. And guess what, lucky recipients? He came in your age. He came in almost in your lifetime. And you can meditate on him, not just as an alambana, but as your chosen ideal, the inner ruler, eternal, seated in your heart, the antaryami, the ishtam, or as Vivekananda said, as an avatar, as you wish. So before I forget, here's what Swami Vivekananda is saying about this path of adhikara vicharya. He says, vichara. In India, worshipping the Guru is the first duty indicated by the Vedas. It has its good and bad ideas, but you must remember that we are in unique company and that no one among us has a right to force his faith upon the others. Yet without an unbroken chain of discipleship, nothing can be done. Is enlightenment mere child's play? To have no connection whatsoever, yet to call oneself a disciple, that's idiocy. So if a man refuses to go on in the right way, turn him out. Nothing, I say, can be done for him without the chain of discipleship, that is, the power transmitted from guru to disciple, and from him to his disciple, and so on. I know this because I have been vouchsafed the ideal Shastra. I have seen the ideal man. All incarnations, of all of them, Sri Ramakrishna was the greatest, because in him there is knowledge, devotion, love, infinite wisdom, infinite love, infinite works, infinite compassion for all beings. You have not yet been able to understand him. People will come to know him by degrees. Any of you may join any party you like. I have no objection, not in the least. But traveling this world over, I find that save and except his circle of devotees alone, everywhere else, thought and act are at variance. So, and he says in here, every one of his disciples knows how much Sri Ramakrishna loves him. So, of us 5 million and growing since Sri Ramakrishna passed away in 1886 or so, we all have that deep, sweet love. Very, very grateful to have even a bit of knowledge about him and to know a little bit of who he is. But in context of the class, this first class I've been giving, which is now about to come to an end, we've been looking at how to qualify ourselves in 3 different darshanas by mere mention. I could take a chart on each one of these points. I don't know if there will be a time in 5 charts to do that, 5 weeks to do that. But we've made it this far, and you can see that Vedanta and Tantra stream are pronounced in this wisdom, which we need to inculcate and make our own, so that if anyone comes up to us and talks to us about any one of these darshanas, we'll have more than just an inkling of what it is. Oh, Kundalini, you mean you're talking about chakras, or you're talking about food or breathing exercises? No, I'm talking about one of these great Indian darshanas that thousands of souls have gotten enlightened, illumined by, because they have heard and they have seen the perfect Shastra and the ideal man. That's the advantage we have today. So let's go here and see more of this as we move on. Om Bhadram Karnebihi Sriniyama Devaha Bhadram Pashema Akshabirya Jatraha Sthiraya Rangaish Tushtuvamsas Tanuvir Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swasti Na Indra Vidashravaha Swasti Na Pusha Vishwadevaha Swasti Na Starksho Rishtanemihi Swasti No Brihaspati Didatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshiping the Lord and Mother with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.